Yeah. You are Romanian, yes?
No, my parents were Romanian at some point.
Care e povestea românității?
What's your story about you being or not being Romanian?
Oh, so my mother is from Sibiu, and my father is from a village close to Arad, Aluniș. And in '74, they left Romania and they came to Ingolstadt in Bavaria. And they met there. They met on the playground where I grew up as well. And there you go.
Și cum ai ajuns aici? Acum.
How comes that you're here?
Oh, that was a good story. So I met Liviu Dinu in Qatar, in Arabia.
În Qatar?
Yes, at another conference. And then we had a good time. We skipped a lot of the conference to go to the beach and sneak into a hotel and go secretly swimming there. And so we stayed in touch after that. And then when we had our daughter, Emilia, 8 months ago, I sent him an email saying, look, Livio, now we have a daughter too. And he said, this is great, amazing. And so he invited me to come here. And I said, this is great because I can show my wife and my daughter where my daughter's grandparents are from. So we're doing both.
Ok, să trecem la terorism.
Let's move to the
Ce înțelegi prin conflicte armate?
What do you mean by armed conflicts?
Well, it's a dispute between two countries where people are killed and where soldiers go to war.
Sunt incluse aici și atacurile teroriste?
Do you include in these terrorist attacks?
In my analysis, I did not include terrorist attacks, but a lot of the armed conflicts that we study have terrorist attacks as part of them. For example, in Syria, in Iraq, and most places in the Middle East.
Care e diferența între atacurile teroriste și atacurile armate pe care le analizezi tu?
Okay, well, that you'd have to ask someone who is an expert in conflict studies. I'm a computer scientist, so we took what conflict and peace experts consider armed conflicts, and that's what we studied. And there are other things that are more just terrorism, so for example, things that happen in Europe, but those we decided not to study. But I think the differences are fluent. There's no hard line, I don't think.
Și practic a analizat contextele media, nu și social media.
Yeah, so you only looked at media context and you didn't look at social media.
Correct,
right?
yes. We wanted to study the mainstream media, but a very interesting other thing to study would be, as you hint at, the effect of social media, because a lot of the conflicts involve social media as a means of propaganda, for example. For example, the terrorists in Syria, they propagate a lot of their soldiers through social media. So that would be an interesting thing to study as well. But we were mostly interested for now in the role of the more traditional media.
Și care este nuantata? Ce au observat și care e nuantata pe care...
What's your result and your conclusions? What's new with your study?
So the new thing with our study was the scale at which we did this. Previous studies looked at a single language, or they looked at 1 or 2, maybe 3 newspapers, and we tried to study a much broader context. So we studied 14 languages, and we tried to study the entire media landscape in those languages. So ours is an approach that takes breadth rather than depth. And the good thing is we had access to a lot of data from media, online newspapers, and so one of the tricky things in our study was to study all those languages that I don't even speak. Out of the 14 languages, I think I speak only 3 or 4. But in the study was included Romanian, which I don't speak. There was Indonesian, Turkish, Polish, Hungarian, and so it was very important to develop methods that could do these analyses automatically without the researcher, me, having to understand everything. But you see how there is a natural trade-off, because I can look at a lot of different things, but I can't go in the very deep depth for all of these. And this is why it's a very nice case for why social scientists and computer scientists have to talk to each other and work with each other, because I can analyze the data and I have common sense, but I don't have the deep knowledge in conflict studies. So in follow-up work, we want to work more closely with political scientists and so on to bring the two really together.
Și cum poți să patinezi printre atâtea limbi? Care este algoritmul? Care e șmecheria? Ce a urmărit?
Do you have any
Cuvinte cheie
observation?
sau
Yeah.
ca să parcurgă prin atâtea limbi, trebuia cumva să...
So yeah, what did you look at? Do you have any algorithms that went for lexical entries, or what did you?
Yeah. So
for?
the main technical challenge was to find in this huge corpus that we had the documents that are interesting to us, because the corpus that we had has many millions of documents for every single day, and those are not only news, they're also cooking recipes, they're social media posts, they're all sorts of videos, just everything. And so what we needed to do was decide, is a document a news document? And second, is it about one of the armed conflicts that we wanted to include in our study?
Okay, but what were the clues?
The clues were the following. So, for example, for identifying whether a document is speaking about a given armed conflict, for example, to decide whether a document is about the Syrian civil war, what we did was we look at the words that appear in the document, and what we do is we look whether it contains strong indicator words for the conflict. And now the question is, how do you define the list of indicator words? And that's the tricky thing, is that we need to find a list for 14 languages, which I don't even speak. So what I did was the following. I took a few words which I knew are about conflict. For example, the word soldier, war, terror, bomb, gun, and so on. And those I translated into all the 14 languages with Google Translate, and it's possible. It took me a day to do in all 14 languages. And then, this is a very short list though, so I wanted to expand this list to also find other words such as peace treaty or booby trap bomb, like the more rare words. So the way you do this is you look for other words, how much are they statistically associated with the strong words that I have identified earlier. And then you have basically for every word in the vocabulary a score that tells you how much is this word conflict related. And then you can go into your text and you can see, is there a conflict related word that occurs in the proximity of a mention of the country? And if that's the case, then we say this is a conflict related document. This is not a perfect method. It's about 80 to 90% correct, but when you work at this scale, you can never have anything perfect. So what you do need is something that's statistically very likely to be good.
Și cum v-ați apărat de fake news? Doar survolând peste text, nu-ți dai seama dacă textul este adevărat sau fals, nu?
Yeah. How did you guard against fake news? Because you cannot distinguish between.
Yeah, you can't.
You can't.
Yeah, so you can't. Our approach didn't go so much into depth. We could not determine whether something is fake news. This is a big open problem. It's a very important problem that a lot of people are working on now, but we did not try to solve that. One thing is that our data, well, let me actually not say that, but if there is a lot of fake news about a conflict, it also means there's a lot of interest about the conflict. So at the level of analysis that we were interested in, fake news is not a problem, because we didn't go into the text very deeply to characterize what is said. We were mostly interested in seeing how much is said about the conflict.
And can you give us some spicy observations about?
Yes, okay. So overall, all the 14 languages have very similar attention patterns. So we looked at these curves that basically tell you over time what percentage of all newspapers write about a conflict on a given day. And across all the languages, the patterns are fairly similar with some marked differences. For example, countries that have a colonial history in a country of conflict tend to cover a conflict more. For example, Mali and Central Africa get more attention from the French media, although in general, no one cares about Africa. So that was one observation. The media in the West care about the Middle East, and they also care, so most conflicts are in the Middle East. There's one big one in Ukraine, and there are a few in Africa out of the ones we studied. Everyone cares about the Middle East. No one cares about Africa, except the French media who care about Mali and Central Africa, but not so much when the conflict started, but when the French soldiers went there. So
what about Ukraine? Does anybody care about this conflict?
The Eastern European countries like Romania, Hungary, and Poland, they care especially much about Ukraine and also Turkey. So there's this geographic proximity that plays a big role, especially in the case of Ukraine. Those countries are afraid that Russia might do the same to them. So there is, in general, you could say that there is a very egocentric view on these armed conflicts. And there are also some interesting open questions that I haven't found an answer to. For example, if you take the armed conflicts in the Middle East, Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, they all started in the Arab Spring in January, February 2011. But they have very different patterns of attention. For example, Egypt and Libya, the media cared a lot in the beginning. Attention really spiked, and then it took some time, it took about a year or so for the curve to level off. In the case of Yemen, no one ever cared. They didn't in the beginning, and they still don't. And Syria is a very interesting case, because in Syria in the beginning there was very little attention, and then it grew over time. It grew over time, and it stayed at a very high plateau. So I understand that why the plateau is there, because it's been the longest and the most deadly out of all those conflicts. What I don't understand yet is why in the beginning there was much less tension on Syria than there was on Egypt and Libya. And this would be another one of these cases where it would make sense to work very closely with a political scientist or someone who does international relations to understand in more depth what the difference is.
Adevărul e că nu poți cuprinde atâtea conflicte.
So the truth is that you can't just make sense out of everything, all the conflicts.
Yeah.
Și
The world is complicated.
Și doi, dacă am ști de toate astea, ce am putea face?
So what's to be done, even if we were aware of all these conflicts and we could understand them? Is it something that we can do about it?
Well, I think it would be hard to change. So there are maybe several things. One, the media plays a very important role for conflicts also. There's a theory called agenda setting, also called the CNN effect, that says if CNN reports about a conflict, they have the power to even change the conflict, to make a government enter or retract from a conflict. But in order to understand how big this danger of like potentially a negative influence of the media is, we need to understand what the dynamics even are. Because once we can say, okay, we have scientific proof that the media plays a big role and possibly a negative role here, then we could change the laws to make it harder for them to report on certain things. For example, if you look at the United States, they have these embedded reporters where journalists are allowed into the conflict zone, but only if they have a special passport. So the question is, how do they change the whole reporting? And so here we need to understand the dynamics in order to change the laws. And also how the entire population sees conflict can be very important for the entire kind of the very center of what a country is. I'm from Germany, and in Germany, World War II is the biggest event that happened possibly in history in the mind of German people. So the way we see ourselves is determined by how we see the war, but how we see the war is determined by how we see the media. So this is very important. Or if you look at Armenia and Turkey, they have no diplomatic relations because they can't agree on their opinion about a war that's already over 100 years ago. So, and again, this is really controlled by the media because people see no one is alive anymore from that time. So we only see these things through documentaries, books, newspapers, and so on. So again, how we see wars, how we see history is very important for how we see the world and how we see ourselves.
Interesant că suntem într-un moment în care se schimbă atâtea informații și e ca și cum ne-am fi întors în timp. Că nu percepem atâta informație. El a spus că percepem egoist fiecare chestie. E ca și înainte când nu aveam media sau social media în sensul ăsta.
Yeah, we are at the same point.
Adică numai proximitatea, știrile din proximitate, din satul celălalt le...
The things that are in our closest proximity, so we can't go back to time, so we can't understand really what happened there.
But what's amazing is, in 50 years from now, we will be able to go back in time because today we record everything. So the study of history will be very different in 50. It's already different from what it used to be because we have 10 years of social media now. Facebook started in, I think, 2005. So we have over 10 years of social media, which is starting to enter the historical range. And what this means is we now don't just have the important events that happened. We also have, and that was reported, we also have all the garbage. We have everything that people posted on Facebook, on Twitter, and so on. And this means we see what did not go into the history books, which enables a completely different study of history. Because right now, we can just see what some scribe in some monastery 500 years ago thought was important enough to write down. And now we have it all. So I think history will become much more of the job of a garbage sifter. Someone who has to deal with a lot of unimportant things to find some very important things buried in there.
Și în același timp, news-ul e determinat de social media și de dorințele publicului.
So the media is pretty much determined by what the public expects and wants to.
Adică nu e vina neapărat a...
It's not, yeah, he says he's a journalist, so he says it's not our fault, the media. It has this face.
It's a marketplace. There is supply and demand. The media need to make money, and to make money you need to sell newspapers. It's easiest to sell newspapers if you sell people what they want to buy. It's a very difficult thing, but as every market, there could be ways of setting up regulations and rules that lead to the best outcomes. It's never going to be perfect, but again, it's important to understand how this market works, so we can put the right rules into place. And there are very interesting initiatives such as the Wiki Tribune, the newspaper started by the founder of Wikipedia. He is trying to decouple the commercial interests from the reporting, but it remains to be seen whether that works. There's a lot of skepticism, but who knows? The internet brings us a lot of opportunities for coming up with different ways of financing reporting. So, but it's yet an open question. What is the best model?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go.